Good evening.
Just so that we get a sense of this, how many of you were here on Wednesday night?
Oh,
okay.
It's a decent percentage.
So, so I haven't moderated a Q&A about the same film this close to almost 2 nights in a row. So I'm going to try and be spontaneous, but I feel like there are some basic questions that we should go back over again.
I'm going to give contradictory answers.
Let's start with, obviously, the concept for this. Tell us a little bit about discovering the source material and deciding that this was something you wanted to explore into a feature film.
Yeah, I mean, I think wanting to explore, I think was almost primary, trying to find something that was really contained, and that would be a character study. And then my friend Mario went through his own mosquito infestation in his downtown LA apartment, and it was something that had a very visceral effect on him. And he told me about this story or about this experience that felt very cinematic to me, and that was the origin of it. And I didn't quite know what to do with it, and then everything else beyond that initial experience and kind of but the idea, I felt like mosquitoes as an insect, and for everything that has been explored in terms of, we're talking about, the idea of having your blood, kind of the vampiric lore, like somehow mosquitoes had not been explored.
So, I mean, it's obviously a very visceral concept. I feel like everyone can sort of relate to what their sort of humanly response would be to something like that. Some fear, some disgust, so just sort of like a visceral feeling that you get over the idea of that many insects.
I just think it's universal.
Yeah.
Outside of an entomologist, I don't think a lot of people have, some type of, positive response to the idea of a mosquito. I mean, it's you get itchy welts. They're a nuisance. They spread disease. So, the idea of it, I think everybody has an adverse effect or an adverse reaction to him.
We talked about this a decent amount the other night in terms of like what he becomes, but now we can actually talk about it for real, which is obviously he stays human, but you do avoid going down the path that the fly takes, which is an actual metamorphosis, even though his body does change significantly. So tell us about using this sort of metaphysical manifestation of what his relationship is to the mosquitoes becomes as a means of sort of telling the story about this man.
I guess that goes back to how he's wired, and why does he seek out to commune with the mosquitoes, and why do they fascinate him from the outset? I think it's he's somebody who is very lonely and has a difficult time communicating with humans. He operates kind of almost mathematically, where he analyzes, processes data, and so I came from a need where coming from, as I said, from Mario's experience, I just felt like, all right, it'd be really interesting if this was something that he did occupationally. Did as in the sense of like that his analytical side applied to work, and then that would also apply to his fascinating with the ecosystem of the mosquito, and then you can layer the two together. So obviously his introduction to the first mosquito is coupled with his fascination with Lena. And to me, the initial relationship is in some ways kind of a sublimation of what is a very childlike and strange approach to sexuality, because he, in all social contexts, he's very childlike. And to me, like that initial fascination is very kind of sexual in a way, because from that first bite is born the whole family, generations of these mosquitoes. So to him, this is, it becomes his family.
Max, tell us a little bit about at what stage you got involved, and what sort of, when you first read the script, what are some of the thoughts that went into your head as someone knowing that you're going to try and bring this vision to life? And how did the first conversation go between the two of you as to what the story was going to look like?
Well, we met with Filip like a few years back, even before that, and he brought me on board to help out another project he was co-producing. So we started talking about some of the concepts, and he also did some other development on another picture that he was going to direct that unfortunately we kind of shelved for a while, and hopefully it might come back later. So right through that process, as we were working on another picture we were developing, and he was developing his story, so I read the script, and I had some experience doing crowds with other pictures before in visual effects. So the technical approach was, it wasn't simple, but I had some experience, so I wasn't afraid to do that. But we were going from a micro world to a macro world from a technical aspect, and the visual aspect of the story was very intriguing for me as well. It was very personal. It was very symbolic, and I knew it would be
personal.
Personal. Well, maybe that was the wrong choice of words. Personally became. I mean, I got bitten by a lot of mosquitoes during this show. That's for sure. But yeah, so we were analyzing a lot of mosquitoes for the film when we started doing this, and we got a lot of reference. Filip is very visual. We were discussing everything in detail. He gave us a lot of references. We did a lot of studies. How even individual mosquito, moves. There wasn't as much material out there 3-4 years ago when we were discussing this, but we did find some research at Oxford and some other things, so I could tell that, mosquitoes don't fly very well, as a matter of fact. They are terrible flyers. They flap like 600 to 750 flaps per second, just to kind of hover around, and they're kind of awkward, really. It's a very strange creature. As I start getting fascinated, as we're getting into the research more and more, I'm like, yeah, this is going to be cool. We're going to be doing some definitely visuals that has never been done before, micro to macro, and we also trying to create a certain consciousness. So from the story aspect, I was very intrigued by the motion and the feeling that we can get in the scenes. And there's a lot of other amazing visual effects outside of just the mosquitoes there.
I remember you were talking about modeling the flight pattern of the hive after starlings, right? Is that something that you just sort of came up with for the visual appeal of what this would look like, or is there actual sort of evidence in the mosquito world that they move in that kind of a pack formation?
No, I mean they're always cloud-like. Because they're so light, they're subject to the wind taking them left and right, so they kind of, we found things that were just shot in the wild, just kind of YouTube stuff, because that really, there's more, within the research world, it was more focusing on the macro and figuring out how are we going to shoot what, is a very intimate and very rare sight of them laying eggs, because they're so finicky, it has to be like perfect, and that was the most difficult thing to shoot. Everything else is much easier, but you're talking about a focal length that's less than 1 millimeter, so being able to adjust to wherever they land and how they position, and they're just fidgety. So that stuff, we kind of, we figured out, okay, we're gonna get this. Everything else was researched then through just YouTube and figuring out, but then doing something and creating something that's very un-mosquito-like, that's when the rest of the natural world came in, and as you said, it was the movement then with murmurations, with starlings, and looking at schools of fish, the way that they move through water, things that would speak to organization that mosquitoes don't have. They'll bump into each other, but they're not going to do something where they react one to the other. And I wanted them to have a certain type of shape of movement. Initially we're talking about, the figure 8, and that's kind of the first time, but you already know that there's a communication between the two, because the first time that it's indicated is when he comes, bon appetit, they fly in. Then he says, quiet, I'm listening to this, and the volume goes down, so things are happening off screen, but it's suggesting that there is a communication. And then after Mother's death, when they all go on to the window, you start to get a sense that there's something else, that he's finding a way, in this fever dream of his, and the first sign is that figure 8 and movement, which is coming in from the starling, and then later on it's this, to me it's kind of this them going into another space and time, where it happens when Lena comes in. So those things were kind of modeled after other animals or some other versions of things that I saw in the natural world.
I'm really curious about it from actually having to animate this, because the movement in the natural world is an incredibly complex network of animals communicating with each other like instantaneously. How does that translate into what you do to create that artificially? Is there some like special algorithm you have to come up with specific for the randomness, the seeming randomness, but yet simultaneous aesthetic beauty of the movement?
So we had a little reference, as much as we could, to try and mimic the natural world. And Martin Nedelski and at Battleship in Bulgaria took on this challenge as a whole team. So we have 3D tools like particles, effects, fluid simulations. So they were using these kind of algorithms that are tools and techniques to create certain types of murmurations. We used forces basically, but they were real animators, and we were trying to create a certain consciousness based on real murmuration, but of course we were creating certain patterns. There was a lot of symbols, and can we hit those patterns? We're actually animating forces around them in a virtual world to try and, as Filip said, those mosquitoes are really light. So actually in a virtual world, we can blow different kind of vortexes and winds and gravity and play with these forces to see how these particles
but we got very lucky. I mean, honestly, with this particular vendor, because I was at the Cannes Film Festival with and just having dinner with a friend who's a VFX super, much like Max, and he was working on Roma with Alfonso Cuarón, and he was kind of the creative lead, because that movie had a ton of visual effects that you don't really see. And I told him that I'm having like incredible difficulty trying to find a vendor that will be able to do these type of fluid simulations based on birds. And he was just like, I just saw his he just had that little thing that went off, and he said, I have this amazing vendor that I worked with in Bulgaria, and they just did an animation for a commercial that they worked on this model for these birds. They worked on it for half a year, and they have it. They already have the system built. And that was just like, that saved us, because it's like the next day he made the intro. They had a window to take this on. They were fascinated by the concept. And so that's when I introduced Max to them, and had it not been for that, and it was such happenstance, building that from scratch. I mean, we would have never been able to afford it on our budget. So it's like they had done the R&D. So it's these things that just kind of, you put it out there and it materializes, and it's incredible. It's a lot of films are blessed with just good timing, and we had, aside from this, we had several instances of that.
Well, when they do start to fly in unison, what has been, in my opinion, something very grotesque in the movie, although those close-ups of the various stages of the mosquito becomes something quite beautiful in the abstract. And I'm curious about this duality in the film, because as I was saying, I think just when you first got here, I feel like there's this real tension between beauty and grotesqueness going on all throughout the film. You've got you've got this sort of very sophisticated world that you've created. His apartment has an aesthetic beauty. They're surrounded by very nice things. Charlotte and Olivier, both very good-looking people. And then in the middle of this, you have this man going through a very grotesque transformation. And that's sort of creating a very odd feeling, and I'm curious how you came upon, I guess, that tension, and how deliberate was that the interplay between the aesthetic beauty of everything and then the grotesqueness of what's going on to the main character.
I mean, I don't know if I ever thought about it. I think it was very intuitive. So yeah, I think it's a lot of the stuff. I mean, when you come with casting, you're talking about complementary pieces and personalities. Obviously, there's, you want Richard to feel like an outsider from the beginning, and even though you empathize with his childlike qualities, the fact that he doesn't understand certain social norms, but that's a character and story type thing. And then But yeah, I mean, I think I wanted Lena to have a certain spellbinding quality, not only beautiful but also very free, and somebody who's just curious about the world in a way. And I guess Richard's curious, but he's curious about things that are in very particular systems. The moment that something breaks, the moment that a wine is tainted, and it's not mathematically, it shouldn't be, it breaks down, for him. Whereas kind of, she has a totally different approach. And so you're finding contradictory things. And I think, so some of that stuff was intuitive. I think with a lot of stuff, when you're talking about the amount of decisions that you're making as a filmmaker, it's like 90-some% are very deliberate. Everything else, it's kind of, you feel your way through.
But there's also so much deliberate craft in terms of the formal aspects of the film, with the cinematography and the production design and the use of color and the sound design and all of these things. And actually, the sound design is another one, because, here, every time the mosquitoes come in, it's like piercing, you're sort of viscerally reminded of that, because almost worse than feeling the mosquito on you is hearing it in your ear. So tell us about...
Yeah, exactly. And just to add to it, we did a lot of concept design. So when Filip was creating the world, we already had a lot of nice wisdom, and we knew what the world's gonna translate into, because that apartment too, as far as visual effects, we built that beautifully on a set, and that was all blue screen. So we actually recreated New York outside, and the whole Central Park, it's all CGI. So we then, when we started putting the mosquitoes in there, it just kind of like what Filip said, kind of naturally fell into a certain look, and we just lit it to beautiful cinematography that Eric did, and it just kind of was more like a feeling at the end, just kind of fell together naturally.
Of course, the sound design is one of the things that comes in towards the end. So tell us how much of that was really like written in the script versus what you and your team just decided you wanted to bring us into when you were actually constructing it in post-production.
Yeah, I don't think, I had it, it's not, something at script stage that you don't, I thought about sound in terms of how that was going to play or interplay with production design, because I wanted the space to feel very cold, to be concrete, to be echoey in a way where that single mosquito, kind of those first 2 nights, the way that it behaves, the way that he can hear it, the way that he's tracking it, him hiding under the sheet, that was something that I had storyboarded, then him waking up and that next morning still hearing it, trying to kill it, with the rolled up magazine. So that stuff was in script. In terms of design and then how you're going to do that came much, much later, and trying to figure out how within a swarm of mosquitoes, how you can pinpoint individual ones. And we ended up using a kazoo and then pitching it just so when you're hearing the Doppler effect of mosquitoes going left to right and towards camera, away from camera. So that became very musical. But once again, we were, a lot of stuff was just pulled from some type of catalogs of like samples of mosquitoes and stuff, and it just sounded just like one big wall of sound, very flat. So then you start playing with it. And then with the score is predominantly violins and violas, also kind of at the same frequency as the mosquitoes. And I just wanted to do string instruments that sounded like wings, and then that tapping or that kind of that beat when the mosquitoes are coming is the musicians tapping on the wood of the violin and viola. Kind of rhythmically to give it this building tension, and so that was the concept of it. Then you're layering. Anytime he's at work, you have the servers, which are emitting a certain humming at a similar frequency, and then we started playing by the end of it, where when you're hearing the servers, it's actually mosquitoes, and when you're hearing mosquitoes, it's actually the servers, because for him, it's these two things are starting to unite. It's his software, his algorithm, called the mosquito plus the mosquitoes, and you're starting to get in his world. And then same thing where the music starts to do have a similar effect. So at the end, when the mosquitoes come out, what you're hearing the score, and it's suggestive of. So you start to play with sound and kind of trying to get experimental, and the more he goes into his psychosis, you kind of want to do with visuals, with sound, with music. you want to have everything start to amp up, just so you're more connected to his journey.
Was it difficult to write the ending of this film? I'm curious to know your decision making in that creative process, because you obviously you have to. The story can presumably go in a variety of directions. You opted away from the full-blown like metamorphosis, so that it stays grounded in the relationship between the two of them, but you have sort of fantastic, what is it, the magical realism. He goes underwater and the mosquitoes follow him. Was that a difficult conclusion to arrive to, or did you play with other ideas?
No, I played with other ideas. I mean, that came during a rewrite where I was looking at a koi pond, and I had just, I'm trying to remember, I think, yeah, I was looking at a koi pond and just thinking about, about water and about the mosquitoes that at some point they're going to have to leave his apartment in order to live outside of that very closed system, and that he would be the Pied Piper and he would lead them. And I was watching, and I'm blanking. What's the Peter Sellers movie based on Jerzy Kosinski's film? Hal Ashby's.
Oh, Being There?
Being There. And I remember then him walking on water at the end of the film, and how impactful that very moment was. And I think I was looking at that koi pond thinking about being there, and I thought, what, I think it's the opposite of where he goes to the bottom of the water and then looks up and finally sees them all arrive, knowing that his legacy will live on. So that ending came, I think, during a pretty late rewrite. And to me, that was, it felt very right, because we're starting underwater with Mother, and then we're ending underwater with him, kind of looking up at his legacy. But it's to me, that's the full life cycle of tracking, going from Mother and then going back to him, kind of, and his journey through his own metamorphosis.
Before we take some questions from the audience, I just want you to retell one story about was it your producer that was smuggling in mosquitoes?
Oh, yeah.
And is there also such a thing as a mosquito wrangler? Like, did you have to have a special job for that?
I mean, we did at the research stage, because I think it was at UC Davis, there was an entomologist there. I started getting into this thing where I was looking for the very specific genus of mosquito, which is already you're going down a crazy, it's a crazy wormhole. And I wanted, I had already written that shot of Mother being entombed in the tumbler glass, and the tumbler glass having that magnifying effect, and I wanted to shoot that analog. I didn't want to do any VFX, and we ended up doing that where the camera was really coming almost from the ceiling, and it was this crazy shot of it twirling around, but I wanted the actor's reflection in it, because I didn't want to cheat it, and this one genus of mosquito is white, it's like angelic, and so that's all, and we don't, that mosquito is, I think, specific to North America, and it is in New York, so I was very happy that I was going to be true to its origins, and that, I wasn't going to have to cheat that, but they didn't have them in Europe, so I ended up bringing euthanized mosquitoes, a whole jar of them, with me to Europe, and just so I have them on set so I can place them and be able to shoot them. Euthanized. Full-on euthanized. That's what the entomologist said. Those were fully euthanized. Passionate killing. Well, you can't squish them. I mean, and then we ended up bringing eggs of those mosquitoes with us to Europe as well, because we shot, the stage stuff was all shot in Warsaw. And then my producer, Alyssa, started trying to raise them in the studio. So she got those eggs out there, and because, initially I thought it'd be great to have them on set. Just even if they're just flying by camera, it's going to give you something natural. So we were going to release these at specific moments during the filming. And the moment where he says, "Welcome to the world, little guy," he has the mosquito in his hand, and I wanted him to release a real mosquito. So, we started, okay, well, let's go on this journey. And so Alyssa had a room, which was the mosquito room, where she had the euthanized ones, and she had the eggs, and they started going into the larva stage. But then, being able to give them the right amount of protein and the specific protein for them then to, as a larva, to be able to feed on. I mean, she went pretty crazy. And so, yes, we had some of the adults, but really we had a really difficult time getting the right temperature, humidity, everything for them. So, yeah, but if,
I mean, thank God for your cast.
yeah, well,
but
they were ready. They were totally ready. It's I think when you sign up for a movie like this, you're prepared for everything, including,
it would have been
bitten
worth
by
it,
live mosquitoes.
Just one last thing that actually came to mind, because Max was earlier talking about the difference between macro and micro photography, and I was just, I guess, taking for granted that the mosquito was always digitally created. Was there any actual photography of the various stages of the mosquito as it's going from egg to fully formed?
Yeah, we all shot that. All that
that's
stuff.
All of that
real.
is legit.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Enhanced, with a lot of compositing effects, but
Yeah.
that's real.
I mean, it's the stuff in the. I think some of the stuff we comped in. I think we actually. I was lucky enough. I knew exactly what I wanted in terms of the larva pupa stages. I had already established the alarm clock with that green light spill, which would give you some frame of reference, just kind of contextualize it spatially. And so when I had that tumbler glass with the background, so by the time we're in post, we were able to shoot a lot of that stuff in the exact same lighting environment, so it wouldn't have to be too cheated. So they were, by the time they were a larva, they were put into water, kind of similar spherical shape of the glass, so it would have similar distortion and stuff. But so a lot of that stuff was done that way. Other stuff I think we had comped in. Obviously the mosquito biting was comped in because you're never going to get it just right. Yeah.
Well, that very first one in particular was.
It was really difficult to direct mosquitoes to begin with.
Well, I mean, the first mosquito bite looks so legit that I was wondering if
on the neck.
Yeah, if you used like a fake neck, but the mosquito was real.
The mosquitoes.
No,
real.
all the biting, the mosquitoes are real.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they do this whole thing, like it's almost like a dog where, like as you're coming in and trying to get it, so they move their legs back and forth, trying to position themselves in before the proboscis comes in, and then it's fishing around underneath. I mean, I actually had all the stuff, because to me, it started getting too scientific, but we had the photography of the proboscis going inside and trying to find a blood vessel. And it's incredible, and I mean, but that's it starts to take you out of story and getting into a thing that you would never see. But it's fascinating because it comes in and it goes around under your skin until it finds a blood vessel, and then it starts to suck. And the same thing, and this particular genus of mosquito has a clear belly, so you start seeing it fill up with blood, and it's totally transparent. It's so beautiful. So I shot all this stuff, but again, it's like you're not going to be able to,
That's the exact definition. Yeah, exactly.
So you start to go into that thing, and it's not serving the narrative. I mean, it's just so beautiful.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah, but at some point you're just like, you know what? This is not a film about science. It's a film about a guy who becomes fascinated with mosquitoes, and if it's not serving the story, it's got to go. Yeah.
Is there any maybe latent metaphor about the fact that their drink of choice is dark red wine? Is that meant to sort of have like a? Oh, okay, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, for sure. I mean, I think it's the blood and the wine, and I think all the Christian lore. I mean, obviously, that's all that symbolism is there for a reason.
And just to kind of maybe rub out on the visual effects, we try to do in visual effects. If you can shoot it practically, please do. CGI is great, visual effects and animation and enhancing everything is great, but there is a sense of realism if you can at least get it at some point and just fill it in. And we had Rajiv Joseph, which did a spectacular job on compositing a lot of these things. So very, very subtle and looks completely photorealistic, like you said. It's a real mosquito, but we had to kind of put in the plate, rack focus in a certain way so that it matches, Eric's beautiful photography, and it just, hopefully you didn't even notice, but yeah.
Does anyone want to jump in? Who's got questions? Yeah. Just should blurt it out.
Okay, do you consider Richard part of the community of mosquitoes, or do you consider him the host?
Is Richard the host, part of the community of the mosquitoes, or somewhere in between?
I mean, I think he starts out obviously, as the host. he's the blood meal as that chapter marker. So I think between him being the blood meal to him then going into the egg, he switches over, right? So I mean, he's still serving the. It's to me, I always had this idea that between him and Mother, like every single mosquito coming out of the two was their family, and without him being the host, they can't populate. And so, but by the time you go on his own journey, to me, it's then he becomes the mosquito in terms of his outlook, in terms of the way that he's learning and he's becoming the mosquito himself. So from egg all the way to imago, when he becomes the adult, then he becomes a mosquito himself.
Anyone else? Yep.
So, so this is in 2007. So was it sort of being up to I don't know if it's or anything, but is it being stock market crash?
Yeah. Is Richard responsible for the stock market the stock market crash?
Yeah, I mean, I think nobody knows. There was no one incident that led to the crash. It was I mean, there's 100-page papers talking about all the events that had to lead up to it. I mean, it's a black swan, and this is what the guy's talking about, Taleb, about that. It's impossible to trace back. The same way that they don't know why flash crashes happen. They happen, and there's so many theories about these things. So in a way, Richard knows that it's coming, and his boss Edward says, he says we all have to get out the same door. I mean, the moment that it crashes, everybody's in it. So he says, make sure you're the one closest to it. The only way you can be closest to the door is if you start the fire. And so that's the idea. So in a way, what I'm proposing is that, in order to execute on that, to execute his wishes, is he has to, so he helps start the fire.
Yes.
I have a question about the development of this film. So how long does it take to get developed and get picked up? And is it hard to get a budget for this film? And the second question is the music for this film. It's really excellent. So I wonder if you pick those musics up from when you're writing scripts or you pick them when you're post-production.
So development. So I think we started working on the script in 2015, I believe. I think from idea, me outlining, based on Mario's experiences, and then reading Michael Lewis's Flash Boys, and setting it in 2007, New York, getting to script stage, probably by 17, and then we shot this in the summer of 18. And so in terms of funding, I was very fortunate that I had been working, and actually with Max, on another film in Poland, and through that, and I'm a dual national, I'm Polish and American, and there is something like a ministry of culture there, where you're able to apply for grants, and for films that are like this, which are obviously artier films and things that, within the American indie system, you're going to have certain things, you're not going to have the type of autonomy that I was able to have in terms of casting, in terms of everything. So I was able to get a very big grant from the Polish Film Institute, which gave me a big jump. And then the stages came in. I built Richard's entire floor, really. I mean, his flat, plus the entire floor on stages. And then the studio came in with that in kind. And so these were big building blocks. And by the time it came to go out to investors, I had 3/4 of the film financed. So I was in a really good position. In terms of music, there were things that, I mean, obviously I spoke to score. The score I knew was going to be string. I had temped it with Penderecki. So it was very big movements. Again, that's very kind of Christian with a choir. and trying to fill his place that to me felt very cathedral, and I wanted there to be kind of that feeling to be big. I reached out to a composer who did that type of music, and he had worked with Penderecki's orchestra. And since I was in Poland, Penderecki being Polish, I figured, okay, I can get this done. The other music I had the big Schubert piece when he leaves his place, when he's in the limo, and then all the way through when he presents Lena with the kitten. So I had that in the script already with Schubert. The other stuff I had certain songs in mind, and some of them are in the film. Other ones I just simply couldn't afford. When Lena comes in with that swirl, that was supposed to be a Frank Ocean song, a Siegfried, and I had it in the script. I mean, impossible to afford. So there are certain things where I had it in the script, and then it's a process of trying to find something that sounds similar or gives you the same feeling, and then it's just it's trial and error. You put certain things into sequence, you figure if it's working or not, and then I had an amazing music supervisor, Andrea von Forster, who kind of understands kind of the things that I'm looking for, and I'll send her a song and say I need something like this, and then I guess I'll speak to one last song. It's The Birds Turn 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 during Mother's funeral. So that's the lyrics of it are Ecclesiastes, and what he's talking about, it's already kind of a eulogy within that song. And so when he's talking to the mosquitoes kind of en masse in the window, a lot of his dialogue is Ecclesiastes, and so I wanted that song. And then I didn't want the traditional version, and I asked a friend to cover it. And so what's in there is a cover of that song. So a lot of stuff, came from script and came kind of that had narrative purposes.
Anyone else? Yes.
Can you tell us a little more about the makeup and the device? Because they seem a little exaggerated, so process and thought about it.
You can talk about the makeup or the prosthetics.
Yeah.
Prosthetics.
It's with mosquito bites we couldn't find a lot of references of being bitten that excessively. So you'd have to have an allergic reaction. So we went to bees. Not a lot of people are that allergic to mosquitoes, and so we modeled it after kids with extreme allergies to bees, and they start to swell up that way. Because we researched it and really, so you're not going to see it. You're going to see small little welts.
Didn't put Alyssa in a closet.
Yeah. Alyssa would just turn red all over. We took some creative liberties with that. Yeah, but you'll see. What I wanted to create is a look, because the only way that you start to kind of look elephant manish is if you have asymmetry. And so you start to go, first on the cheek, then on the other jawbone, then up here, so where it starts to break it, and you start to get these, kind of where the shadows hit his face when we light him certain ways. So at that point, massive creative liberties.
Yes.
Yeah, I have to say, I didn't really understand the intention of this film. So I'd be interested to know, why did you feel that this was a story that you needed to tell?
No idea.
So there was not any particular message you were trying to convey to your audience? It was just back this idea about the skills and that was it?
There's a message, but the film kind of speaks for itself. The moment that I finish a film, it's my journey with it comes to an end. And then, for a film that's open-ended, there is something that I was exploring, something that I was thinking about during the making of it. But the moment you make something, then you leave it for someone then to fill in with their own experiences, with their own interpretations of things. To me, it's vastly richer that, to leave you with an idea or to leave you with a certain, set of pictures, a story, and then for you to have your own individual journey with it. That's the way that's my favorite type of film, is when I have to go through it and figure out, okay, what is this saying to me, and come away with my own thing. It's usually much richer. So I hate speaking to my intentions, because they're very local to me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think there are just so many different parts to the film, right? There's this religious element, and there's the animals, and then there's the stuff going on in politics. And I know for me at least, I've been having a lot of trouble trying to put things together and create my own interpretation. That's why I was hoping to hear a little bit more about the interpretation that you had yourself.
Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, it's not something that I necessarily want to then. It's very leading, I'll tell you one thing in terms of what's in the background, right? All those things happened on that specific day. If we're talking about August 3rd to August 9th. And I remember that period because I had just moved to LA in, I think, June of 2007. And a lot of times it takes a certain amount of time for you to be able to see things that are happening on a macro scale. We're not able to process that much information, what Richard is trying to do. But I sensed in 2007 a certain type of socio-political rotting. There was something that was going on that was very strange and I couldn't identify. And you go back with decades worth of hindsight and you look at it and you say, wow, like even within this one particular week, you're talking about sports with Barry Bonds, with human growth hormone, right? I mean, everything in a way was that way, felt that way to me. Everything was on steroids, and it was inflated in a way that could not sustain, including the economy, including what was going on with journalism. We're talking about, and this 24-hour news cycle and everything that was, it was deafening, like these mosquitoes. And I thought about Richard as an algorithm himself, being subjected to everything and trying to sort through this massive information. And when you talk about these black swan moments, when you're talking about the crash of 2008, which this was really the inciting incident of the entire crash, on August 9th, when that hedge fund, when it says it's a complete evaporation of liquidity, I mean, that was the moment. But we didn't know that we were drained until a year later. And I think it was September of 2008 when actually everything hit rock bottom. But within this week, to me, something happened. So, you're talking about that factor, and the mosquitoes is simply, it's something, if we're talking about a fable of sorts, this to me, when you're talking about a complete evaporation of liquidity, we're talking about high frequency trading models, which are taking a fraction of a cent from every single trade, as if it's one drop of blood. Some of these things started to layer. So I hope that's somewhat helpful. Yeah, okay.
I'm curious if you've read some just absolutely bonkers interpretations of your movie that you've really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Is there one that sticks out?
I mean, there's some really poetic ones that are beautiful. Samson and Delilah, which I think is, because her cat is Samsa, the one that she loses, and so somebody totally unintentional, but beautiful. I think I'm starting to see more and more where people are picking up on aspects of it. Some of the religious stuff, obviously, like the chapter markings those are icons, and so people are starting to go in and trying to figure out, because there is a ton of that you have the bullfighting, right? So there's something about the sacrifice, and the bull is the symbol of a market. You have it right there on Wall Street, and so people are starting to play into a lot of that stuff, and to me, all those things had a very specific purpose within the story, and I had it kind of operating on certain levels. And then through the making of the film, I forgot about them, which was wonderfully freeing. I was able to then, in a way, feel my way through a script that some of the things that were tertiary things kind of went away. And I didn't focus on them, but they were already on the script. So they were already, when we're talking about production design or props, I had things that had to be a certain color, had to be there, done a certain way, but I forgot why. And so it's and it's a very, where you start to, because when you're making a film, it becomes just about the character, and you have to be in that moment, and the things that to you have a certain significance no longer do, because now you're channeling everything and you have to see things through Richard, through his perspective.
Yes.
Curious to hear a little bit more about the cinematography.
Mhm.
Because it has that like very naturalistic look, but at the same time that very odd, eerie feeling to it, which is very nice. And I was curious to hear if it was how that worked, whether you, your cinematographer, collaboration, which parts. Yeah, just a little story.
So I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to answer the naturalistic, because I really don't think a lot of it is naturalistic. I think it's a lot of it is like super stylized. We did shoot the whole thing wide open, so we shot like I think at a 2 just to give it a lot of to really kind of have it shallow focus and start to go in, and then playing with diopters when we're talking about just Richard, especially as he kind of goes into that. My method of working with Eric is very unique, because we've known each other for a very long time. We've watched a lot of films, and so I come into it with a certain framing, and I pick the lens. I get behind camera. I kind of look through it, and by this point, I've already blocked everything. It's either in the script, or I have like a little blocking I make awful little storyboards just for myself, just to share with him, just so he has an idea how to communicate with the camera team. But he gets to focus on lighting. And with this film, it was super important because of what we were doing with the skies, and we had to light it specific to that. We had to then use practical effects to suggest the movement of mosquitoes to cast shadows. And so he had his hands full with everything else. And then, the lighting, especially since it has such a there's so much primary color, and then the set is so controlled in terms of all the art direction and set deck and costume. I'm going into it, like if everything's green, I don't want anything to then come in to be red, and red was a color that I withdrew from the whole thing. Just wanted the red moments are either blood, wine, or things that are Lena's. Her lipstick, the bottom of her shoes, things that she leaves behind, which to me are relics, because he almost looks at her kind of saint-like. So I don't know I hope that answers your question somewhat. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that if you are here this late, then you definitely enjoyed the movie, so please tell people about its release on Shudder, which it came out last night.
Mm-hmm.
And do you get initial feedback? How does it work with an app?
No, I think my first check-in with the AMC and Shudder folks, I think, is in 2 weeks. So to get some data in terms of viewership, I mean, people, you start to get responses, you start to see stuff on Twitter. Shudder does have its own user forum, so it's
Yeah, I'm sure this film will spark a lot of conversations.
it's so polarizing already.
Oh, is it really?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. It's you get the feedback, like, what the fuck is this thing? I couldn't make it through 5 minutes. So like they don't even make it through the very long opening credit sequence. To like, it's rare that you see an instant masterpiece, which is like, amazing. But it's like,
Wow.
it's that wide a spectrum.
Where is this conversation happening?
It's I think just on the Shudder forum, which I'm not going to visit, I think, anymore. I think once was enough.
Thank you so much for coming back and doing this again with us.
Thank you for having me again.
My pleasure.
So it's and thank you for coming on a Friday night for a movie that you could see online. But I hope you appreciate seeing in the big screen, because for a movie where this much effort's put into the visual effects and to the sound, I still sit through this film and watch on the big screen, because it's really it's how it's intended to be watched. So thank you for not going the easy route, for coming here and seeing it.
Thank you.